The dinner was Henry's idea. It was always Henry's idea. 8 guests, the long table, the silver that Mary had polished that morning because the girl who usually polished it had gone home with a fever, and someone had to polish it, and someone was always Mary. The candles, 42 of them, because Henry believed that a dinner table should glow, and glowing required 42 candles at 3d each, which was 10 shillings and 6d that the estate did not have, but that Henry would spend anyway because Henry understood the cost of everything and the value of making people feel expensive. Mary had arranged the seating. Mary had arranged the menu. Mutton, not beef, because the butcher's account was overdue, and mutton could be had from the Shaws at the Lower Farm on credit, and Tom Shaw would extend credit because Tom Shaw had been extending credit to the Floods since Mary's father was alive, and because Mary had asked, not Henry, and Tom Shaw trusted Mary because Mary explained things slowly and clearly, and Tom always understood. Mary had arranged the wine. Mary had arranged the flowers, chrysanthemums from the garden, because chrysanthemums cost nothing, and Mary understood that a table with free flowers and polished silver looks the same as a table with expensive flowers and polished silver, and the difference is 10 shillings that stays in the account book instead of leaving it. Mary had arranged everything. Mary was not seated. She stood at the sideboard. This was her position at Henry's dinners. Not a servant, not a guest. Something in between. The woman who arranged the room and then stood in it. The woman who knew the price of every candle and the name of every guest and the balance of every account, and who was introduced, when she was introduced at all, as the slow one. Henry was at the head of the table, 30 years old, dark blonde hair, well-groomed, green eyes that moved quickly, across faces, across rooms, across conversations, with calculating efficiency, fastest when smiling. He was handsome, he was witty. He made the table laugh 3 times before the mutton arrived, and each laugh cost the estate nothing, which was the only economy Henry practiced. "My sister," Henry said, gesturing toward the sideboard without looking at it, "don't bother. She's the slow one." The table received this, the way tables receive information about people who are standing and not sitting, with a glance, a nod, and a return to the conversation. Mary did not look up. She was refilling a glass. She had heard this introduction 40 times. 41 now. She counted everything. It was the only hobby available to a woman who had been classified as too slow to have opinions. The guest at the far end of the table did look up. James Hartfield, Duke of Ashton, was 36, tall, 6 feet and 2 inches, with broad shoulders and dark brown hair that was longer than fashionable because he forgot to cut it, or because cutting it required a conversation with a barber, and conversations with barbers led to questions about the estate and the family and the sister was the conversation he could not have without the room changing temperature. He had gray eyes, serious, watchful. The eyes of a man who listened more than he spoke and who had learned, from one specific failure, that listening was the thing he should have done sooner. He looked at Mary. She was holding a decanter. She was pouring with her left hand. The right was behind her back. The fingers curled because she was counting something she did not want anyone to see her count. Her dress was gray, plain, functional, no adornment. Adornment was a tax on time she could spend on numbers. Her fingers were stained. The stain was fresh, not the faded stain of yesterday's work, but the residue of today's work. Someone at this table had been writing this afternoon. Henry's hands were clean. The Duke looked at her hands. He looked at the decanter. He looked at the woman whose brother had just told a room of 8 people not to bother with her. He said nothing. He ate the mutton. He watched. James Hartfield had been receiving unsigned estate reports for 3 months. They arrived in plain envelopes, posted from the village, addressed in a hand he did not recognize, small, precise, each letter formed with the care of someone who treated handwriting the way a mason treats stone. One mark at a time, no corrections, no haste. The reports were not addressed to him by name. They were addressed to the Duke of Ashton, Hartfield Park, regarding the management of neighboring estates in the district. The reports were extraordinary. They detailed the management practices of 4 estates in the district: crop rotations, tenant arrangements, livestock yields, timber valuations. They identified inefficiencies that his own steward had not seen. They proposed corrections that were not merely accurate but elegant. Solutions that solved 2 problems at once, or 3. The kind of arithmetic that does not come from education but from a mind that sees systems the way other people see weather, as patterns, as cycles, as things that can be predicted if you watch long enough. The Duke had shown the reports to his steward. His steward had read them twice and said, "Whoever wrote these understands land management better than anyone I've trained in 30 years. Find them." The Duke had been trying to find them for 3 months. The handwriting was the only clue, and tonight, at a dinner table in Wiltshire, he had seen the handwriting on a woman's fingers. The morning after the dinner, the Duke walked the Flood estate. He had been invited to stay. Henry was hospitable the way a shopkeeper is hospitable, because the guest represented an opportunity, and Henry never missed an opportunity, especially when the opportunity had a title and 40,000 acres. The Duke had accepted because accepting gave him a reason to walk the grounds, and walking the grounds gave him a reason to find the counting room. The counting room was not the study. The study was Henry's, a large room on the first floor, furnished with a mahogany desk and leather chairs and a globe that Henry spun when he was thinking, which was rarely, because Henry did not think so much as perform the appearance of thinking, which is a different skill entirely. The counting room was off the kitchen. It was small. A desk, oak, scarred, not mahogany. A chair, wooden, not leather. A window that faced the stable yard. Shelves with account books arranged by year, each spine labeled in the same small, precise hand the Duke had seen on his estate reports. Mary was at the desk. Perhaps she heard him. She did not look up, because looking up required stopping the column she was adding, and stopping a column mid-addition was, to Mary, like stopping a sentence mid-word, a violence against completion that she could not justify. He stood in the doorway. He watched her work. Her pen moved without haste, not inability, precision. Each number was formed completely before the next began. Each column was totaled once, checked once, and underlined with a single straight line that did not waver. She did not use a ruler for the line. Her hand was that steady. She reached the bottom of the column. She wrote the total. She underlined it. She set down the pen. She looked up. "Your Grace?" she said. "Miss Flood?" A pause. 4 seconds. Her face did not change. Her body did not shift. Her hands did not move. She was thinking. Not emptiness, a room full of furniture being rearranged before a guest was invited to sit down. "You are looking at the handwriting," she said. "I am. You have been receiving reports. For 3 months. I was not certain they would arrive. The post from this village is unreliable. Henry sends his correspondence by private messenger. I use the post office. The post office is slower. The reports arrived. All of them? All 7. Another pause. 3 seconds this time. 7. I sent 9. 2 are missing. 2 are missing. She said this the way a doctor says, "The wound is infected," with calm, a problem identified and who will now solve it, not with the urgency of a person who expects someone else to solve it for her. "I will send them again." You wrote the reports. I wrote the reports. Your brother does not know. My brother knows that I keep the household accounts. He does not know that I keep anything else. My brother believes I add columns. He does not believe I read the results. His eyes went to the ledger on the desk, at the numbers, at the hand that had written them, the same hand that had written his estate reports, the same hand that had identified inefficiencies his steward had missed, the same hand that belonged to the woman Henry Flood had introduced as the slow one. "You are not slow," the Duke said. Mary looked at him. The hazel eyes, steady, patient, the eyes of a woman who had been told what she was by a man who needed her to be that thing, and who had decided, quietly, that being told and being were not the same. "No," she said, "I am not." Mrs. Palmer lived in the cottage at the end of the lane. She was 62, white hair under a plain cap, a sharp face that had been sharp at 30 and that had sharpened further with each decade, the way faces sharpen when a person spends 40 years watching other people make mistakes and keeping a record. She wore glasses on a chain, and she put them on when she wanted to see clearly, and she took them off when she wanted to see the truth, which are different skills. Her husband, George Palmer, steward of the Flood estate for 30 years, had died 4 years ago. He had taught Mary to keep books. He had given her the desk in the counting room. He had told her, once, when she was 16, and when she had shown him a discrepancy in the grain accounts that no one else had found, "You are the most careful person I have ever met. That is not slowness. That is the opposite of slowness. That is someone who refuses to be wrong." Mary had not forgotten this. She had written it in the margin of the ledger she was working on that day, and every ledger since had carried the same sentence on the first page, in small letters, as a reminder. Careful is not slow. Mrs. Palmer had been watching Henry since George died. Without a steward checking the books, the numbers had begun to shift. Timber sales that didn't match the market rate, tenant rents collected at one figure and recorded at another, grain income that disappeared between the harvest and the ledger. She had said nothing. Not because she was afraid. Mrs. Palmer was not afraid of Henry Flood, or of anyone who had not been born when she was already keeping books, but because no one had asked. And Mrs. Palmer had learned in 40 years as a steward's wife and then a steward's widow that the difference between knowing and being believed is the difference between standing in a room and being invited to sit down. No one had invited Mrs. Palmer to sit down since George died. She had a dog, a collie named Chalk, black and white, old, with a gray muzzle and a habit of following anyone who smelled of ink. Chalk had belonged to George. Chalk now belonged to Mrs. Palmer. Chalk followed Mary whenever Mary walked to the cottage, which was every Tuesday, because Tuesday was the day Mary brought the week's accounts to Mrs. Palmer for checking, as she had brought them to George, as she would continue to bring them until someone told her to stop, and no one had told her to stop because no one knew she was doing it. "The Duke is asking questions," Mary said on the Tuesday after the dinner. She was sitting at Mrs. Palmer's kitchen table. Chalk was at her feet. The accounts were open between them. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that follow handwriting." Mrs. Palmer put on her glasses. She looked at the accounts. She took off her glasses. She looked at Mary. "He found your reports." "He received 7 of 9. 2 are missing. Henry's messenger collects the post on Thursdays. The reports were posted on Wednesdays. Then Henry has the other 2. Mary was quiet. The pause, 5 seconds this time, held the weight of what that meant. Henry had 2 of her reports. Henry knew someone was writing about estate management to the Duke of Ashton. Henry did not know it was Mary, because Henry did not believe Mary could write about estate management, because Henry had spent 11 years making sure no one believed Mary could write about anything. "He'll work it out," Mrs. Palmer said. "He'll work it out when he finds the handwriting." "And when he finds the handwriting?" "He'll call Dr. Liddell. He'll have me classified. If I'm classified, my testimony is void. The second ledger is void. The discrepancies are void. Everything I've recorded for 11 years becomes the record of a feeble-minded woman, and a feeble-minded woman's records are not evidence. They are symptoms." Mrs. Palmer looked at her. The sharp face, the reading glasses on the chain, the 40 years of watching people make mistakes. "Then we need to move faster than Henry," Mrs. Palmer said. "I don't move fast. That is the entire problem. You move at exactly the right speed. Henry moves at the wrong speed. The difference between the two is that your speed produces accurate numbers, and his speed produces a dining room full of people who think he's charming. Charm is not arithmetic. When the arithmetic arrives, the charm leaves." "That is the most Mrs. Palmer sentence I have ever heard." "I have been saving it for 11 years. I was waiting for someone to need it." The Duke returned to the counting room the following morning. Mary was already there. She was always already there. She arrived at 6 before Henry woke, before the household stirred, and she worked in the quiet the way some people pray in the quiet, because the quiet was the only time the world did not tell her what she was, and in the quiet she could be what she actually was, which was the most precise mind in the county, working at a scarred oak desk in a room off the kitchen, while her brother slept in a mahogany study upstairs and called himself the manager. "The 2 missing reports," the Duke said. "I have copies." "You keep copies?" "I keep copies of everything. Copies are the difference between a record and a memory. A memory can be denied. A copy cannot." She handed him 2 sheets, the same small, precise hand. The reports covered the dairy output of the flood estate and the timber valuations of the neighboring parish. The Duke read them standing. He read at their pace, the pace at which they had been written. "Your dairy is underperforming," he said, "by 14%. The feed mix is wrong. Henry changed the supplier last autumn because the new supplier is his friend from Cambridge, and the friend charges more for worse grain. The cows produce less milk. The milk produces less cheese. The cheese sells for less at market. The difference is approximately 31 pounds a year, which Henry does not notice because Henry does not read the dairy accounts. Henry reads the total at the bottom of the page. The total looks acceptable because I adjusted the feed schedule to compensate for the worse grain, which recovered 9 of the 31 pounds. But I cannot recover all of it because the grain is genuinely worse, and no amount of scheduling will make bad grain into good grain." She had spoken for 45 seconds without pausing. This was, he was beginning to understand, how Mary spoke when she was speaking about numbers. Fluently, rapidly, without the pauses that characterized her speech when she was speaking about anything else. The pauses were not a deficiency. The pauses were what happened when Mary moved from a language she trusted, arithmetic, to a language she did not trust, conversation. In arithmetic, every word means one thing. In conversation, every word means several things, and Mary, who could not tolerate ambiguity in a column of numbers, could not tolerate it in a sentence either. And so she stopped, chose, selected the one word that meant exactly what she intended, and the pause was the selection, and the selection was the intelligence, and the intelligence was the thing her brother called slow. "You speak differently about numbers," the Duke said. "Numbers don't interrupt." "Is that what people do?" "People hear the pause, they fill it, they finish my sentence with what they think I was going to say. They are always wrong. The pause is not hesitation. The pause is because there are 4 possible answers and I'm choosing the best one. People who finish my sentence, give me the worst one, and then wonder why I look disappointed. I will not finish your sentences. You haven't yet. I noticed. How long did it take you to notice? The first question you asked me. You asked it yesterday. You are looking at the handwriting. You waited 4 seconds. Most people wait 1. The Duke was quiet. Not an empty quiet. He was learning that slow and brilliant are as different as a stopwatch and a compass. One measures speed, the other measures direction, and the person holding the compass will always arrive somewhere more interesting than the person holding the stopwatch, even if they arrive later. I had a sister, he said. Mary looked at him. 7 seconds this time, not choosing a word, choosing whether to ask. Had, she said. Alice. She died 3 years ago. She was 18. How? Fever, in an institution. She had been there for 7 months. Why was she in an institution? Because a man with a clipboard asked her questions for 20 minutes, and she paused before every answer, and he counted the pauses, and he did not count the answers. He wrote, deficient in understanding, unable to respond with appropriate speed, committed, classified, dead within the year. The counting room was quiet. The stable yard outside was quiet. Chalk, who had followed Mary from Mrs. Palmer's cottage, and who was lying in the doorway because Mary carried the smell of writing, and Chalk followed that smell everywhere, lifted his head and looked at the Duke with the look of a dog who has heard something that requires attention. She was not deficient, Mary said. No, she thought at a different speed. She thought at exactly the right speed. The interview was at the wrong speed. What did she think about? The Duke reached into his coat. He took out a small book, leather-bound, worn, the pages soft from handling. He opened it. The pages held drawings of birds, observations about weather patterns, and the mathematics of tides. When they came, how far they reached, the relationship between the moon and the water expressed in numbers that no one had taught her because no one had known she was watching. She thought about tides, the Duke said, and no one asked. Mary looked at the book, at the numbers, at the handwriting, small, precise, careful. The handwriting of a woman who had been classified as feeble-minded because she paused before she answered, and who had died in a room where no one looked at what she had written down. "May I?" Mary said. The Duke handed her the book. She held it as she held all ledgers, with both hands, the spine supported, the pages turned from the corner, because she understood that a book is a record of a mind, and a record of a mind is the most important thing a person can leave behind. She read for 4 minutes. She did not speak. The Duke did not speak. Chalk did not speak. The counting room held the silence the way counting rooms do, precisely, with no interest in filling it. Her tide calculations are correct, Mary said. The method is unusual. She derived it from observation, not from formula. She watched the water and built the mathematics backward. That is not deficiency. That is originality. The man with the clipboard would not have recognized it because the man with the clipboard was measuring speed, and originality does not move at measurable speeds. No, the Duke said. It does not. The Duke stayed at Flood Hall for a week. Henry was delighted. A Duke in the house was a performance, and Henry performed. He gave tours of the estate he did not manage. He showed the dairy he had not visited in 3 months. He walked the tenant fields in boots that had been polished that morning by Mary because someone had to polish them, and the boot boy had the same fever as the silver girl, and someone was always Mary. The Duke walked beside Henry. He listened. He watched. And in the spaces between Henry's performances, he walked to the counting room. He came every morning at 7. Mary was always there by 6. The pattern established itself the way patterns do between two people who value routine, without discussion, without negotiation, with the quiet mutual recognition that 7 o'clock meant the Duke in the doorway and Mary at the desk and chalk in the space between. He asked questions, not the questions Henry's guests asked, the social questions, the weather questions, the questions that expected short answers and did not want long ones. The Duke asked questions that required the pause. How does the crop rotation work across the 4 fields? 6 seconds. The furniture rearranging. The south field has been in barley for 2 consecutive years, which is 1 year too many. The soil is showing signs of nitrogen depletion. My father rotated properly. Barley, turnips, clover, wheat, 4-year cycle. Henry shortened it to 2 because a 2-year rotation produces more barley in the short term, and Henry's Cambridge friend buys barley at a premium. The soil doesn't care about premiums. The soil cares about nitrogen. By next spring, the yield will drop by a 1/5, and the premium will not cover the loss. Have you told your brother? I wrote him a report. He read 1 paragraph. I wrote a summary. He read half. I wrote the conclusion on a card and left it on his desk. He used it to mark his place in a novel. What novel? I don't remember. It wasn't a good one. The card was better. The Duke almost smiled. The almost smile, the muscles moving toward expression without arriving, was the same expression Mary had seen on 3 occasions now, when she had said, "Numbers don't interrupt," when she had diagnosed his sister's tide calculations as originality, not deficiency, and now 3 almost smiles. She counted everything. "You are counting," the Duke said. "I am always counting." "What are you counting now?" "The number of times your face has almost moved." "And the number?" 3. 3 is not enough. I agree, but I work with the data I have. The 3rd morning, the Duke went to the dairy. Not with Henry. Henry did not go to the dairy because the dairy smelled of milk and manure and the sourness of cheese that is not yet cheese, and Henry preferred rooms that smelled of mahogany and candle wax. The Duke went alone. He stood at the doorway and watched. Mary was inside. She was speaking with the dairymaid, a girl of 19 named Ellen, who had been making cheese for 3 years and who understood butter and curds and the relationship between temperature and yield the way Mary understood columns and totals. They were discussing a feed order. "The barley is the wrong grade," Mary said. "Ellen, look at the color. It's darker than last month's. It's darker because it's lower quality. The supplier is sending 2nd grade and billing first. The invoice says 1st grade at 14 shillings a hundredweight. This is 2nd grade. 2nd grade is 9 shillings. The difference is 5 shillings per hundredweight, and we take 12 hundredweight a quarter. That is 3 pounds a quarter my brother is paying for grain we are not receiving. Should I tell Mr. Flood? 4 seconds. I will tell Mr. Flood, in writing, on a card. He will use the card to prop up something, and the grain will continue to arrive at the wrong grade and the wrong price, and the cows will continue to produce less, and the cheese will continue to suffer, and I will continue to adjust the schedule to compensate. But the card will exist. And when someone eventually reads it, and someone will, the card will say that I told him. That is not a solution. That is a receipt. The Duke watched from the doorway. Mary had not seen him. She was holding a handful of grain, rubbing it between her stained fingers, assessing it as she assessed everything. Slowly, thoroughly, trusting her own measurement more than anyone else's label. He thought of his steward's words. Whoever wrote these understands land management better than anyone I've trained in 30 years. The person who understood it was standing in a dairy in a gray dress, holding bad grain, explaining the difference between first grade and second grade to a 19-year-old girl who listened because Mary explained things at a pace that allowed understanding. Not slowly, at the pace of understanding, which is a different speed entirely. That afternoon, the Duke walked to Mrs. Palmer's cottage. He walked alone. The collie did not follow. He was with Mary, because Mary was at the desk, and the desk was where the ink was. The Duke walked the lane without a dog, which made him feel oddly incomplete, as though he had forgotten something essential, which told him something about how quickly a dog and an oak desk and a woman with stained fingers had become the architecture of his day. Mrs. Palmer was in her garden. She was pulling weeds with 60 years of practice, each one a personal insult to the soil. "Your Grace," she said without looking up. "Mrs. Palmer." "You've come to ask about Mary." "I've come to ask about the second ledger." "That is the same question. Mary is the ledger. The ledger is Mary. You cannot ask about one without asking about the other. Sit down. I'll make tea. It won't be good tea. I cannot afford good tea, but it will be honest tea, which is the only kind worth drinking." She made tea. It was not good. It was honest. "George taught her," Mrs. Palmer said. "Her husband, the steward, the man who gave Mary the desk. She was 16. She brought him the grain accounts and showed him a discrepancy, a 3-pound difference between what was harvested and what was sold. 3 pounds. He had missed it. 25 years of keeping books, and he missed it. She found it because she added the column twice. Not because she was unsure, because she was thorough. He said, 'You are the most careful person I have ever met. That is not slowness. That is the opposite of slowness.' And her brother? Her brother called her slow when she was 12. He called her slow because she paused before answering his questions, and Henry Flood is not a man who waits for answers. Henry Flood is a man who decides the answer before the question is finished, and then wonders why the world does not match his expectations. Mary pauses because she is constructing the correct answer. Henry interrupts because he has already constructed the wrong one. The difference between the two is the difference between a house that stands and a house that falls down, but the house that falls down is built faster, and speed is the thing this world rewards. And the physician? Dr. Liddell came 2 years ago. Henry called him after their father died. Henry wanted control of the estate. Mary was the obstacle. If Mary is competent, Mary has a claim to management. If Mary is classified, Mary has nothing. Liddell sat with her for 15 minutes. He asked her questions. She paused. He timed the pauses. Not a single page read, no request to see the ledgers, no question to George, because George was already dead. He wrote his letter, slow to respond, consistent with limited capacity, and he left. 15 minutes. That is all it took to turn 11 years of work into a symptom. And no one challenged it. Who would challenge it? I am a steward's widow. Mary is the slow one. The physician has a letter. Henry has charm. Charm and a letter will defeat a widow and a pause in any room in England. That is not a legal argument. That is a fact. The Duke sat in Mrs. Palmer's kitchen, drinking honest tea, and understood that the woman across from him had been carrying the same weight he had been carrying, the weight of having watched someone classified by speed and erased by a system that measured the wrong thing. "George's sentence?" the Duke said. "The one he told Mary. You are the most careful person I have ever met. She writes it on the first page of every ledger, small letters, top left corner. Careful is not slow. That is her prayer. That is the only prayer worth saying in a counting room. If you are still listening, If you are in the counting room with the scarred oak desk and the ink-stained fingers and the collie in the doorway and the book that a dead girl wrote about tides and the prayer written in small letters on the first page of every ledger, thank you. You stayed. And if you are new here, welcome. This is Duke of Hearts Romance. We tell stories about people the world underestimated. You are in the right place. Now, back to Flood Hall. On the fourth day, the Duke found the second ledger. Mary had not shown it to him. He found it because Chalk led him to it. Chalk had been following Mary for 6 years, from the cottage to the counting room, from the counting room to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the small locked drawer in the bottom of the oak desk where Mary kept the book that no one was supposed to see. Chalk knew the route because Chalk had walked it 1,000 times, and when the Duke followed Chalk one morning, because following a dog is the simplest form of investigation, Chalk led him to the desk, and the desk led him to the drawer, and the drawer led him to the second ledger. Mary found him reading it. He had been reading for 20 minutes. He had started at the first page, 1834, the year Mary turned 16, the year George Palmer gave her the desk, and he had read forward through 11 years of columns, each one a mirror held up to the official ledger, each one showing the reflection that Henry had been careful not to let anyone see. Timber, sold at 40 shillings, recorded at 28. The difference noted in the margin in Mary's hand, the margin note smaller than the column entry, as though the truth needed to be quieter than the lie. Tenant rents, collected at £12, logged at 10. The £2 difference tracked quarter by quarter, year by year, a river of missing money flowing in one direction, toward Henry's dinner table, toward the candles at 3p each, toward the Cambridge friend, and the polished boots, and the smile that made a room laugh. The Duke turned the pages slowly, not from inability, from the weight of what the pages held. 11 years of a woman sitting at a desk at 6 in the morning, recording every shilling her brother stole, knowing that no one would read it, knowing that the physician's letter would cancel every number she wrote, and writing anyway. Because the numbers were true. And truth, even unread truth, is still true, and Mary, who could not tolerate ambiguity in a column, could not tolerate it in her life either. He was on page 7 when Mary walked in. "That drawer was locked," she said. "Chalk sat beside it. I opened it. I apologize." "You opened a locked drawer in my desk." "I followed a dog to a locked drawer in your desk. The dog has better investigative instincts than my steward. The dog follows ink. The ledger smells of ink. The dog is not an investigator. The dog is a nose attached to loyalty. That is also a description of an investigator." Mary looked at him. 8 seconds, the longest yet, not choosing a word, choosing whether to trust. "You have the second ledger," she said. "I have the second ledger. Then you have 11 years of evidence. Evidence of what? Evidence that my brother has been redirecting estate income since he took over the accounts 6 years ago. Our father was alive for the first 4 of those years. Our father never checked. He trusted Henry because Henry was charming and because fathers trust sons and overlook daughters. Henry started stealing while our father was still breathing. Timber sales recorded at 28 shillings when the actual price was 40. Tenant rents, collected at the higher rate and logged at the lower. Grain sales that appear in no ledger at all, not the first, not the second. They simply vanish between the threshing floor and the account book. Approximately £200 a year for 6 years. £1,200. The estate has been slowly starving, and my brother has been eating. And you recorded all of it. I recorded all of it. Every transaction, every discrepancy, every shilling that walked from one column to another without justification. Why didn't you tell someone? 6 seconds. Who would I tell? The magistrate? My brother plays cards with the magistrate. The solicitor? My brother's solicitor. The vicar? My brother donated the new pulpit. I am a woman who has been examined by a physician and classified as slow. My brother has the physician's letter. The letter says, slow to respond, consistent with limited capacity. If I bring a ledger to the magistrate and my brother brings a physician's letter, the magistrate will read the letter. He will not read the ledger. Then why keep the ledger? Because someone will ask eventually, and when they ask, I will need to show them both, the ledger and the letter, and let them decide which document describes a limited mind, the one that stole £1,200 or the one that caught it. The Duke closed the book. He held it for a long time. He thought of Alice's commonplace book, the tides, the birds, the mathematics no one had asked to see. He thought of a 20-minute interview and a man with a clipboard and a word, deficient, that had killed his sister as certainly as the fever. I asked, he said. You asked. I should have asked sooner. About Alice. About the book. About the interview. I should have been in the room. I should have said, show them the book. Show them the tides. Show them what she wrote down when no one was watching. You couldn't have known. I could have asked. Asking is the thing I should have done. Asking is the thing that no one does, because asking requires admitting that the person in front of you might know more than the person across the desk, and admitting that requires a patience that no instrument is designed to measure. Mary looked at him. At the gray eyes, serious, steady, holding the weight of a sister he had not saved, and a question he had not asked. You are asking now, she said. I am asking now. That is not too late. For Alice, it is. For Alice, it is. For me, it is not. That afternoon, they worked in the counting room together. The Duke did not ask questions. He sat in the chair by the window, the chair that had been George Palmer's, the chair that no one had sat in since George died, and he read the estate reports he had brought from Hartfield Park. Mary worked at the desk. Chalk lay between them. The silence was not awkward. The silence was the sound of two people who had each lost something to a stopwatch and who had found in this room, with its scarred oak desk and its window facing the stable yard, a place where the stopwatch did not run. Mary glanced at him once. He was reading with his brow furrowed, the concentration of someone encountering numbers written by someone better at numbers than he was, and who was adjusting to the unfamiliar experience of being second best at the thing he was good at. You're frowning at my timber calculations, she said. Your timber calculations are better than mine. Your timber calculations are adequate. Mine are precise. The difference is about 6%. 6% is a significant difference. 6% is the difference between paying a steward and being a steward. You pay a steward. I am a steward who is not paid. That should change. 3 seconds. Many things should change. I have a list. The list is 4 pages. The first item is the feed grain. The last item is the wallpaper in Henry's study. The wallpaper is not urgent. The feed grain is, but no one reads my list because the woman who wrote it was classified as slow, and a slow woman's list is not a list. It is a symptom. The Duke set down his papers. He looked at her, at the hazel eyes, steady and patient, at the ink on her fingers, at someone who had been making lists for 11 years and who had never seen a single item crossed off by anyone other than herself. I would like to read the list, he said. It's 4 pages. I read slowly. Mary looked at him. 5 seconds. Not selection this time. Surprise. The surprise of a person who has offered something 400 times and been refused 400 times and who has just been accepted on attempt 401. She opened the drawer. She took out the list. 4 pages, written in the small, precise hand, each item numbered, each item followed by a cost estimate and a timeline and a single sentence of justification. The Duke read all 4 pages. No skipping, no skimming, no page. Used to prop up anything. When he finished, he said, "Item 17, the drainage on the lower pasture. Your cost estimate says £11. £11 and 4 shillings. I rounded. Don't round. The 4 shillings matter." Mary looked at him. 5. The muscles moved past almost. They arrived. He smiled. Mary did not count the smile. She held it, the way you hold something you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. The next morning she took him to the fields at dawn, not to show him, to count. The sheep were in the upper pasture, and the shepherd's count had been off by 3 again, and Mary needed to walk the field to correct it before the quarterly report, and the Duke had said he read slowly, and walking is slower than reading, and a man who reads slowly might also walk slowly, and a man who walks slowly might be useful company on a Tuesday morning when the fields are cold and the sheep are numerous and the counting takes an hour. They walked in silence for the first 20 minutes. The Duke counted with her, or tried to. He lost count at 47. Mary had reached 63. "You lost them," she said. "The white ones look the same." "They are not the same. The ewe with the torn left ear is number 12. The one beside her with the darker fleece on the hindquarters is number 31. Number 31 lambed twins last spring. Number 12 lost her lamb in February. They stand together because grief recognizes grief, even in sheep." He looked at the 2 sheep. He looked at Mary. He understood that the woman beside him did not merely count. She observed. She recorded. She noticed the torn ear and the darker fleece, and the reason 2 animals stood together in a field at dawn, and she filed it. And the filing was not obsession. The filing was love for the things she was responsible for, expressed in the only language she trusted completely. She counted the way Alice had counted, not from compulsion, from attention, the attention that the stopwatch punished and the commonplace book preserved. "You know every sheep," he said. "I know every number. The sheep are attached to the numbers. Knowing the sheep is a consequence." "That is the most careful sentence I have ever heard." George Palmer said the same thing. He used the word careful. Everyone else uses the word slow. The words are not synonyms. "No," the Duke said. "They are not." They finished the count. 114. The shepherd's count had been 111. The 3 missing sheep were in the lower field, behind the hedgerow, where they went every Tuesday because the grass was better and because sheep, like people, form habits that no one questions until someone counts. "The shepherd will not know I corrected it," Mary said. "He has been counting sheep for 40 years. I have been counting sheep for 6. His pride is worth more than my accuracy." "Is it?" 4 seconds. "No, but I correct the number in the ledger, and the ledger does not have pride. The ledger has the truth. And the truth is that we have 114 sheep, not 111, and the 3 in the lower field need worming, and the shepherd will worm them on Thursday because I will mention it to him on Wednesday, as though I had just noticed, and he will think he noticed, and the sheep will be wormed, and the count will be correct, and no one's pride will be damaged. You manage people the way you manage accounts. I manage people by managing around them. It is not efficient, it is not fast, but it works, and working is the only metric I have left, because every other metric was taken from me by a man with a stopwatch. On the 5th day, Tom Shaw came to the counting room. Tom was a tenant farmer, 43. Weathered face, broad hands, a man who understood soil and sheep and the price of oats, and who did not understand why his rent receipt said one number and his payment said another. "Miss Flood," he said, "I've a question." "Sit down, Tom." Tom sat. The collie moved from under the desk to under Tom's chair because Chalk was democratic about whose feet he warmed. "My rent. I pay £12 a quarter. I've paid £12 a quarter since your father's time, but the receipt Mr. Flood gives me says 10. It's said 10 for 3 years. I've asked twice. He says the extra 2 is a levy. He doesn't say what the levy is for. I've asked the other tenants. They have the same levy. None of them know what it pays. My wife said I should ask you. My wife keeps every receipt we've ever signed, keeps them in the Bible, between Psalms and Proverbs, because that's where you keep things you might need to prove." Mary was quiet. 10 seconds. The longest in this story. She was not choosing a word. She was choosing whether to tell Tom Shaw that his levy was his landlord's dinner table, his landlord's wine, his landlord's boots that Mary polished, because the boot boy had a fever, and his landlord's Cambridge friend who sold bad grain at good prices. "The levy is not a levy," she said. "The levy is a discrepancy. Your rent is £12. The estate records say 10. The difference is £2 a quarter, £8 a year, multiplied by 9 tenants. That is £72 a year that is collected and not recorded. It does not appear in any account. It appears in my brother's pocket." Tom looked at her. The weathered face held the expression of a man who has been told that the ground beneath his feet is not solid, and who needs a moment to find new footing. "You're certain," he said. "I have the ledger. I have your receipts, the real ones, the ones you signed. I have the estate's receipts, the ones my brother filed. The two do not match. They have not matched for 3 years. The difference is arithmetic, and arithmetic does not lie. People lie. Numbers do not." "And your brother?" "My brother is charming. My brother makes dinner tables laugh. My brother introduced me to the Duke of Ashton as the slow one. I am slow. I am slow because I check my numbers, and checking numbers takes time, and time is the thing my brother does not give anyone, because if he gave them time, they would count what he has taken." Tom Shaw sat in the counting room and looked at a woman he had known since she was a girl. The quiet one, the one who stood at the sideboard, the one who explained things slowly so he could follow. And he understood for the first time that the slowness was not a limitation. The slowness was the thing that had caught the thief. "What do you need from me?" Tom said. "Your receipts, the real ones. Every quarter for 3 years. I have them. Tuesday." Tuesday. That evening the Duke and Mary walked the grounds. This was not romantic. This was logistical. Mary walked the estate every evening, checking fences, noting repairs, counting sheep because the shepherd was 67 and his count had been off by 3 for 2 years, and Mary corrected it silently every Tuesday by walking the fields herself, and the shepherd did not know, and Mary did not tell him, because telling him would embarrass a man who had been counting sheep since before she was born, and Mary understood that a man's dignity is worth more than the correction. The Duke walked beside her. Chalk walked between them, as chalk walked between all people who smelled of ink. "Your brother will discover the second ledger," the Duke said. "My brother will discover the second ledger because you opened the drawer and you did not lock it again." "I locked it. You locked it incorrectly. The key turns twice. You turned it once. The drawer is now unlocked to anyone who pulls it with more than casual force. My brother uses casual force for everything. He will pull the drawer. I apologize. You have apologized twice now. The first time was for opening the drawer. The second time is for not locking it properly. A pattern is forming." "What pattern?" A pattern of a man who is competent in every room except the room with the locked drawer. The Duke looked at her. The almost smile moved closer to a smile. 4. "You are counting again," he said. 4, she said. "We are approaching a statistically significant sample." They walked. The evening was cool, November in Wiltshire, the sky the color of pewter, the fields brown, the sheep white against the brown in a pattern that Mary had once calculated, the ratio of sheep to field, the optimal density per acre, the point at which one more sheep tips the grazing from sustainable to destructive. She had written this calculation on a card and left it on Henry's desk. Henry had used it to prop up a wobbly candlestick. "When he finds the second set of books," the Duke said, "he will act. He will call Dr. Liddell. He will have me re-examined. If Liddell classifies me formally, not the letter, the classification, my legal testimony becomes void. I cannot own property. I cannot sign contracts. I cannot present evidence in any hearing. The ledger becomes the document of a feeble-minded woman, and a feeble-minded woman's documents are not evidence. They are curiosities." The 1834 Poor Law. The 1834 Poor Law. A 20-minute interview. A man with a clipboard measures how quickly you respond. If you respond slowly, you are classified. If you are classified, you are erased. Not killed, erased. Your property is assigned. Your testimony is void. Your records are inadmissible. You continue to exist. You simply stop counting. Alice was classified in 11 minutes. I would be classified in fewer. Dr. Liddell has already written one letter. The second examination would be a formality. He would ask me questions. I would pause. He would count the pauses. He would not count the answers. The answers are irrelevant to someone who measures speed. Speed is the only metric the law recognizes. They walked in silence. Chalk walked between them. The sheep were white against the brown fields. The sky was pewter. The world was the same world it had been that morning, but the Duke saw it differently now, as a place where a woman could be erased for thinking carefully, where a man with a notebook could undo a mind by timing it, where classified and brilliant were separated by 6 seconds, and a system that counted the wrong thing. "We need to move before Henry does," the Duke said. "Mrs. Palmer said the same thing." "Mrs. Palmer is right. Mrs. Palmer has been right for 40 years. No one has noticed because no one asks women like her for their opinions. Stewards' widows are filed under no longer relevant, which is a filing system that only a man would invent." The following days they built the case. Not quickly. That was not how Mary worked, and the Duke had learned that asking Mary to work quickly was like asking the tide to arrive early. The tide arrives when the mathematics say it arrives, and the mathematics do not negotiate. Mrs. Palmer brought George's old records, the accounts from before Henry took control, the ones that showed the correct timber prices and the correct tenant rents and the correct grain yields. She brought them in a basket covered with a cloth because Mrs. Palmer understood that a basket covered with a cloth looks like food, and no one questions a 62-year-old woman carrying food. "You carried ledgers under a cloth," the Duke said. "I carried evidence under a cloth. If I had carried it openly, Henry would have asked. If Henry had asked, I would have had to answer. If I had answered, he would have known what I was carrying. And if he had known what I was carrying, the ledgers would have gone into the fire, and the fire does not keep records." "You are remarkably strategic for a steward's widow." "I am remarkably strategic for anyone. The widow part is irrelevant. The strategic part was always there. My husband married me for it. He said, 'I married the cleverest woman in the parish, and I will spend the rest of my life pretending I thought of everything she thought of first.' A good man, pretended very convincingly. Mary compared the old records with the new ones, column by column, entry by entry. She worked at the pace she always worked, the pace of accuracy, which is not a speed that makes for dramatic storytelling, but which is the only speed that produces evidence a magistrate cannot dismiss. Tom Shaw brought his receipts on Tuesday, as promised. His wife had indeed kept them in the Bible. They were pressed flat between the book of Psalms and the book of Proverbs, which Mrs. Palmer observed was the most appropriate filing system in the history of accounting, the prayers and the wisdom keeping the receipts safe. Tom had spoken to 3 other tenants. All 3 had the same discrepancy. The levy that was not a levy, the £2 a quarter that went from their pockets to Henry's pocket and appeared in no ledger. The tenants were not angry. They were confused. They had trusted the Floods for 30 years because Mary's father had been fair and Henry was charming. And charm is the currency that buys trust in a county where no one reads the accounts. "They'll testify?" the Duke asked. "They'll bring their receipts," Tom said. "Whether that's testimony or arithmetic, I leave to people who know the difference." "In this case," Mary said, "they are the same thing." The following week, Henry found the reports. Not the second ledger. Mary had moved it the morning after the Duke's mistake with the lock, wrapped it in oilskin, and given it to Mrs. Palmer, who kept it in the bottom of her flour bin, because Mrs. Palmer understood that flour is the last place a man like Henry Flood would ever look. Henry found the reports because the post office held 2 returned envelopes, the 2 that had not reached the Duke, and Henry's name was on the return address because the Flood estate was the return address for all village post, and the postmistress, who was thorough if not discreet, had noted to Henry that, "Your sister's been posting quite a lot lately, Mr. Flood." Henry opened the envelopes. He read the reports. He recognized the handwriting. He came to her room at 9 in the morning. Mary was at the desk. The dog was at her feet. The Duke was not there. The Duke had ridden to the village to collect the receipts from Tom Shaw's wife. "You wrote these," Henry said. He held the reports. "I wrote those." "You wrote estate management reports to the Duke of Ashton." "I wrote estate management reports to the Duke of Ashton because the Duke of Ashton manages his estate competently, and I wanted to know if competent management was interested in the data I collect." "You collect data." "I have collected data since I was 16. I collect it in this room, at this desk, every morning from 6 until you wake up and every evening after you go to sleep. I have been collecting data in this room since I was 16, and you have not noticed because you have never come to this room before today." Henry looked at the counting room. At the desk, oak, scarred, not mahogany. At the shelves with the labeled ledgers. At the window that faced the stable yard. At his sister, who was sitting in a chair he had never seen her sit in a room he had never entered, doing work he had not known she did. "You're the slow one," he said, not as an insult, as a correction, a reminder. The label reapplied because the label was the tool that kept the lock on the door. "I am the thorough one. The label is yours. The work is mine. The physician's letter says I am slow to respond. The physician timed my responses. He did not read them. The letter is a stopwatch, Henry. It measures speed. It does not measure direction." Henry straightened. He was taller than Mary. He was stronger than Mary. He was, in every room except this one, more powerful than Mary. But this was the counting room, and in the counting room the power belonged to the person who could add. And Henry could not add. Henry had never been able to add, which was why he had needed Mary to add for him since she was 16, which was why she had found the discrepancies, which was why the label existed, which was why they were standing in this room at 9 in the morning, having the conversation they had been avoiding for 11 years. "I'll call Liddell," Henry said. "I know. He'll classify you." "He'll try." "He will classify you, Mary. And when he does, whatever you've written, whatever you think you've found, will mean nothing. The records of a feeble-minded woman are not evidence. They are symptoms. I know the law, Henry. I've read it. I read slowly, but I read all of it, which is more than you can say about anything I've ever written you." Henry left. The door stayed open. Mary closed it herself. She sat at the desk, hands flat on the oak, the same surface that held 1,000 columns, 1,000 mornings, the patience of a woman who had counted every shilling her brother had stolen, and had waited, slowly, precisely, for 11 years, for someone to ask. The dog put his head on her feet. "I know," she said to the dog. "I'm counting." She sat for a long time. The room held the silence. The stable yard held the silence. The oak desk, which had been George Palmer's desk, and which had become Mary's desk, and which Henry had never touched because Henry did not enter rooms where the work was real, held 1,000 mornings of work. She opened the bottom drawer. Empty. The second ledger was in Mrs. Palmer's flour bin. The drawer held only the faint smell of oilskin and the ghost of 11 years of evidence. She closed the drawer. She opened the top drawer. She took out a fresh sheet of paper. She wrote in the small, precise hand a list. Items to complete before the physician arrives, copies of all tenant receipts, timber contracts verified against market rates, grain sales reconstructed from the threshing records and the miller's log, George Palmer's original accounts, Alice Hartfield's commonplace book. The list. All 4 pages, every item numbered, 6 items. She counted them, 6 items against 1 brass instrument. The stopwatch would win in any room where speed was the measure. The evidence would win in any room where arithmetic was the measure. The question was which room they would be in when the time came. The Duke returned that afternoon. He had been at the village. Tom Shaw's wife had given him the receipts, and the miller had given him the threshing log, and the miller's wife had given him a cup of tea that was better than Mrs. Palmer's, though he would never say so. "Henry knows," Mary said. The Duke set down the papers. "When?" "This morning. He found the returned reports from the post office. He recognized the handwriting. He said he would call Dr. Liddell." "How long?" "Days, perhaps a week. Liddell is in Salisbury. Henry will send a messenger today. The messenger will reach Salisbury by tomorrow. Liddell will come by Wednesday." "That gives us 6 days. 5. I don't count today. Today is already spent." He looked at her, at the calm, at the steady hazel eyes, at the hands that were flat on the desk, not shaking, not gripping, flat. She had known this moment would come for 11 years, and who had prepared for it at the only speed she trusted. "You're not afraid," he said. 3 seconds. "I am afraid. Fear and calm are not opposites. Fear is what you feel. Calm is what you show. I have been showing calm for 11 years. I have been feeling fear for 11 years. The two have coexisted without difficulty. Arithmetic is excellent company for fear. Numbers do not panic." Mrs. Palmer arrived at the counting room that evening. She brought the second ledger, still wrapped in oilskin, still dusted with flour. She set it on the desk beside the first. "The stopwatch is coming," Mrs. Palmer said. "Wednesday," Mary said. "Then we have until Wednesday. After Wednesday, either the ledger speaks or the stopwatch does, and the ledger has been waiting longer." Mrs. Palmer sat in George's chair. She put on her reading glasses. She opened the second book. She began checking the numbers, column by column, entry by entry, the way George had taught Mary, and the way George had learned from 30 years of watching men with titles make mistakes that men without titles had to repair. "Mrs. Palmer," Mary said. "Yes." "Thank you for keeping the ledger in the flour." The flour was the safest place. Henry Flood has never been near flour in his life. Henry Flood thinks flour is something that happens to other people. That is the problem with Henry Flood. He thinks everything that matters happens to other people. Dr. Liddell arrived on a Wednesday. He was 54, well-dressed. He carried a leather case and a notebook, and the confidence of someone who had been classifying people for 20 years and who had never been asked to justify a classification, because classification is a one-way door. Once you walk through it, the person on the other side has no voice to argue they should not have walked through it. Henry met him in the study upstairs, the leather chairs, the globe. They spoke for 30 minutes. Mary was not invited. Mary was the subject, not the participant, which is the position the law assigns to people it has already decided about. Liddell came to the room at 11. "Miss Flood," he said, "your brother has requested a formal assessment." "I am aware. I will ask you a series of questions. Please respond as quickly as you are able." "I will respond as carefully as I am able. Speed and care are not the same measurement." Liddell opened his notebook. His pen was ready. His stopwatch, a small brass instrument that he held in his left hand the way a weapon is held, with familiarity, without affection, was ready. He did not look at Mary. He looked at the notebook. The notebook was where the classification lived, and the classification was the thing he had come to produce, and the person sitting across from him was not a person. The person was a data point, and data points do not require eye contact. "What is the date?" "The 14th of November, 1845. He noted the response time. 3 seconds. Acceptable. "What is the name of the current sovereign?" "Queen Victoria." 2 seconds. Acceptable. "What is 7 multiplied by 8? 4 seconds. 56? Liddell noted. "Slow to calculate." The answer was correct. He did not note this. The answer was irrelevant. The speed was the data. "What is 13 multiplied by 9? Pause. 5 seconds. 117. Liddell noted. "Slow to calculate." Increased. Latency with complexity. The answer was, again, correct. This went unrecorded. 13 multiplied by 9 is not a question that tests intelligence. It is a question that tests speed, and speed and intelligence are as different as the stopwatch and the compass. But the stopwatch was the instrument Liddell held, and someone holding a stopwatch sees everything as a race. "What is the capital of France?" "Paris." 1 second. He noted, "Acceptable." The fastest answer Mary had given. Because Paris is one word, and one word requires no selection, and selection was the thing the stopwatch punished. "Who is the Prime Minister?" 3 seconds. "Sir Robert Peel. He has held the office since 1841. He will likely lose it within the year because the Corn Law debate has divided his party. The question you asked has one answer. The answer I wanted to give has 3. I gave you the short one because your stopwatch prefers short ones." Liddell noted. "Tangential, offers unsolicited. Commentary, consistent with disorganized thinking." Mary looked at the notebook. She could read it from her side of the desk. The small handwriting, the quick notes, the classification forming one observation at a time. She could see what he was building. She had seen buildings before, Henry's buildings, the physicians' buildings, structures made of speed and labels and the certainty of men who measured the wrong thing and called the measurement science. "Can you read?" "I have read every legal statute related to the classification of persons under the 1834 Poor Law." I have read the Amendment Act of 1844. I have read Esquirol on mental maladies, and Dr. Connolly's treatise on the treatment of the insane. I can read. This went unrecorded. Instead, he noted, verbose response, consistent with agitation. Can you manage household accounts? I have managed the accounts of this estate for 11 years. I can provide the ledgers. That will not be necessary. It is necessary. The ledgers demonstrate. Miss Flood, I am assessing your capacity, not your productivity. Please respond to the questions as asked. Pause. 7 seconds. I understand. You are measuring speed. You are not measuring accuracy. You are not measuring comprehension. You are not measuring the fact that I can identify a 1,200-pound discrepancy across 6 years of accounts that one steward and one brother did not find. You are measuring how quickly I say the word 56, and you are writing slow in your notebook, and when you have written slow enough times, you will sign a document, and the document will erase me, not kill me. Erase me. My property, my testimony, my records, all of it gone. Because I paused. Liddell closed his notebook. Your brother was right, he said. You are agitated. I am precise. Precision looks like agitation to people who prefer speed. The door opened. The Duke was standing in the doorway. Behind him was Mrs. Palmer with a ledger wrapped in oilskin and flour dust on her hands. Behind Mrs. Palmer was Tom Shaw with a Bible that held 3 years of rent receipts. Dr. Liddell, the Duke said, I believe we have met. Your Grace, you classified my sister, Alice Hartfield, 3 years ago, a 20-minute interview in which you timed her responses and did not read her commonplace book. She died of fever in the institution you recommended. I have her book here. I'd like you to read it now. Take your time. The Duke set Alice's commonplace book on the desk beside Liddell's notebook, the small leather book beside the brass stopwatch, the tides beside the timing, the bird observations beside the classification, the mathematics of a dead girl beside the measurement of a living one. Liddell did not pick up the book. I am here at the request of Mr. Flood. You are here at the request of a man who has stolen 1,200 pounds from this estate over 6 years. Mrs. Palmer has the ledger. Mr. Shaw has the receipts. Miss Flood has the record. The only person in this room without evidence is the person with the stopwatch. Henry appeared in the corridor behind them. He saw the ledger. He saw the Bible. He saw the Duke. He saw Mrs. Palmer, who looked at him with the look of a woman who had been waiting for this particular Wednesday. Henry, Mary said. She stood from the desk. She held the first book, the official one, Henry's version, the wrong numbers. Left hand. Mrs. Palmer handed her the second, the real one, the right numbers. Right hand. These are your numbers, she said, holding up the left. These are mine, she said, holding up the right. The difference is 1,200 pounds. The difference is documented. The difference is signed by 9 tenants. The difference is confirmed by the steward's widow who taught me to count. She set both ledgers on the desk. Side by side, the wrong numbers and the right numbers. The brother's version and the sister's version. The charm and the arithmetic. I am slow, Mary said. I am slow because I check. I am slow because I count. I am slow because I do not skip steps, and I do not round numbers, and I do not use a card with a soil report on it to prop up a candlestick. I have been slow for 11 years. In that time, I have not lost a single shilling. You have lost 1,200 pounds. The question is not whether I am slow. The question is whether slow is the word for a woman who catches a thief, or whether slow is the word a thief uses to make sure no one listens to the woman who caught him. The room was quiet. The stable yard was quiet. The collie was under the desk. The desk was where Mary was. Mary was where chalk belonged. Henry looked at the ledgers, at the numbers, at the 11 years of columns that his sister had written in a room he had never entered at hours he slept through. His smile, the dinner-table smile, the charming smile, the smile that had made 8 guests laugh before the mutton arrived, did not leave his face all at once. It left 1 digit at a time, as Mary read the numbers, as the arithmetic replaced the charm, as the room that had always been his, the house, the estate, the name, the label, the power, shifted to the woman at the scarred oak desk who had been counting his mistakes since she was 16. "The magistrate," Henry began. "The magistrate plays cards with you," Mary said, "but the magistrate does not play cards with the Duke of Ashton. And the Duke of Ashton has the second ledger and the tenant receipts and a dead sister who was classified by the same physician you just invited into this room. Dr. Liddell, you may close your stopwatch. You will not need it." Liddell closed his stopwatch. The following month the accounts were audited. Not by Mary, by the Duke's steward, who came from Hartfield Park with 2 clerks and who spent 3 weeks cross-referencing ledgers, tenant receipts, timber contracts, and the grain, sales that had vanished between the threshing floor and the account book. The total was not £1,200. The total, when the grain was included, was £1,431. Henry was given a choice: repay the full amount from his personal funds or face the magistrate. He chose repayment. He left for London the same week. No goodbye for Mary. None for Mrs. Palmer. He said goodbye to the globe in Henry's study, which Mary thought was appropriate, because the globe was the only object in the room that Henry had ever truly understood. Round, decorative, and useful only for spinning. The house was quiet after Henry left, not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of a room after a performance ends and the audience goes home, and the person who arranged the chairs is finally allowed to sit in one. Mary sat at the dinner table that evening. Not at the sideboard, at the table, in a chair, with a plate. Mrs. Palmer sat across from her, Mary had asked, and Mrs. Palmer had accepted, and the asking and the accepting had taken less than 3 seconds, because some pauses are not necessary. "This is the first time you've sat at this table," Mrs. Palmer said. "This is the first time I've been invited. You own the table. Owning and sitting are different things. I have owned this table for 2 years, since my father died. I have stood beside it for 41 dinners. 42, if you count the one where the Duke arrived. I counted. I always count. And now? Now I am sitting, and the mutton is better when you can see it from the front instead of the sideboard." The village adjusted. Gradually, the way villages adjust, which is the way Mary worked, which meant the village and Mary were, for the first time, operating at the same speed. Tom Shaw told the other tenants. The tenants told their wives. The wives told the shopkeepers. The shopkeepers told the vicar. The vicar, who had received Henry's donation for the new pulpit and who now understood where the donation had come from, said nothing from the pulpit, but said everything at tea, which is where vicars say the things they cannot say on Sundays. Within a month, the tenants were bringing their questions directly to Mary. Not to the counting room, to the morning room, because Mary had moved. Dr. Liddell's assessment was never filed. The Duke wrote a letter to the parish board, noting that Dr. Liddell's classification of Alice Hartfield had been conducted without review of her written work, without consultation with her family, and without the observation period the law required, but that was never enforced, because the people being examined were not the people who enforced anything. The parish board did not respond. The Duke did not expect them to. The letter was not for the parish board. The letter was for the file. And the file was for the next woman who paused before she answered. Mary took the morning room. She moved her desk, the scarred oak desk, the wooden chair, the account books on the shelves, from the room off the kitchen to the first floor, where the light was better and the window faced the fields instead of the stable yard, and where she could see the sheep from her chair, which meant she could count them without walking, which saved her a Tuesday. She left Henry's study closed. She did not want it. She did not need it. Henry's study was a room for performing management. The morning room was for doing it. The difference was the same as the difference between a globe that spins and a ledger that balances. One looks impressive, the other works. Mrs. Palmer came every Tuesday. She sat in the chair by the window, the chair that had become hers the way the oak desk had become Mary's, through use, through presence, through the simple fact that a piece of furniture belongs to the person who sits in it most often, and Mrs. Palmer sat in that chair the way she had once sat beside George, and the sitting was the thing she had been waiting for. "My husband would have liked this room," Mrs. Palmer said. "He would have liked the light. He would have liked the numbers. He always said the numbers are happier in good light. He said numbers written in a dark room are sad numbers, and sad numbers make mistakes. I never knew whether he believed that or whether he was trying to get the estate to pay for a larger window." "Both. He always meant both." "That is true. He was a man of layers. Unfortunately, most people only saw the first layer, which was the one wearing the steward's coat. The layers underneath were considerably more interesting. The Duke visited every week, then twice a week. Then he stopped visiting and started arriving, which is different from visiting the way staying is different from lasting. Visiting implies departure, and arriving implies a destination that has been chosen. He brought papers, his own estate accounts, not because Mary had asked to see them, but because Mary was the person who saw numbers the way he wanted his numbers seen. Clearly, precisely, without the roundings and the approximations that his own steward considered acceptable and that Mary would have considered a crime against arithmetic. "Your tenant leases are 3% below market," Mary said, the second time he brought his accounts. "My steward sets the leases." "Your steward sets the leases at the rate that produces the least conversation. The market rate produces conversation because tenants ask questions, and your steward does not like questions. 3% below market across 42 tenancies is £126 a year. In income your estate is not collecting." "You calculated that in your head. I calculated that in 4 seconds, which Dr. Liddell would consider slow. The steward who has been setting your leases for a decade did not calculate it at all. Speed is not the metric that matters. Calculation is the metric that matters. And I calculate." He arrived on a Tuesday in December. Mary was at her desk. The collie was at her feet. Mrs. Palmer was in the chair by the window, reading glasses on, checking the quarterly numbers because Mrs. Palmer had been invited to sit down again, and sitting down was the thing she had missed since George died. "You moved the desk," the Duke said. "The morning room has better light." "The morning room is on the first floor. The counting room was off the kitchen. The kitchen is where servants work. I am not a servant, I am the manager of this estate. The manager sits where the light is. And where the sheep are. The sheep are a secondary consideration. You count them from the window. I count everything from everywhere. The window merely simplifies the route." He sat in the chair across from her. Not Henry's chair, a new chair, brought from the library, a chair that did not belong to anyone who had called her slow. He opened a book. He read. She worked. The dog lay between them. The silence was not empty. The silence was the sound of two people who did not need to speak because the speaking had already been done, and what remained was the being, which is quieter and which lasts longer, and which does not require a pause, because a pause implies that something will follow, and what followed was simply this. He asked her a question. She paused. He waited. He always waited. "You're thinking," he said. "I was." "Are you finished?" "I was 3 sentences ago. I was choosing which one to give you." "Give me all 3." She gave him all 3. The first was about the estate. The second was about the sheep. The third was about Alice's commonplace book, which Mary had read 14 times, and which she had placed on the shelf in her morning room between the ledgers and the accounts, because a record of a mind belongs with other records of other minds, and because Alice deserved a shelf. The Duke listened to all 3. No interruption, no finished sentence, no timed pauses. "You listened to all 3, she said. "I will always listen to all 3. "That is not efficient. That is not the point." The collie lifted his head, looked at the Duke, looked at Mary, put his head back down because chalk had been following ink for 6 years, and the Duke carried the same scent now, and a dog who follows one will follow both, and both were in this room, and the room was warm, and the desk had good light, and the sheep were in the field, and the accounts were balanced, and the ledger on the shelf, the small leather one, the one with the tides and the birds, was open to a page where a girl who had been called deficient had written numbers that described the relationship between the moon and the water, and the numbers were correct, and no one had asked to see them, and now someone had. And the book was on a shelf in a room where a woman who had been called slow sat in good light and did the work she had always done. Only now the door was open, and the chair across from her was occupied, and the man in the chair waited. He always waited. And Mary, who had spent 27 years being told she was slow, and 11 years proving she was not, and 1 extraordinary month being asked, finally, carefully, by a man who understood that the pause was not the problem, the pause was the answer, looked at the Duke and gave him the sentence she had been choosing for the longest pause of her life. "Stay," she said. The Duke stayed. This is a story about speed and the people who measure it wrong. In the 1830s and 1840s, the law measured intelligence by response time. If you answered quickly, you were competent. If you paused, you were deficient. Parish interviews lasted 20 minutes. The interviewer asked questions and timed the answers. If the answers came slowly, if the person being examined thought before they spoke, or chose their words carefully, or simply processed the world at a different pace, the interviewer wrote slow, and the classification followed. Feeble-minded, deficient, imbecile. Words that erased people who were not absent but present, present in a way that the stopwatch could not measure. Women were classified at higher rates than men. Women who paused were hysterical. Women who spoke carefully were confused. Women who kept records were obsessive. Women who understood arithmetic were anomalies that the system preferred to file under deficient rather than reclassify under competent, because reclassifying would mean admitting the system was wrong, and the system, like the stopwatch, like the notebook, like the man who held both, was not designed to be wrong. Mary Flood is fiction. The classification was real. The stopwatch was real. The erasure was real. If this stayed with you, tell me where it landed. Was it the ink on her fingers? Mrs. Palmer waiting 11 years? The dog who follows ink? Alice's tides? The card on Henry's desk? The pause? The numbers? The brother's smile dying 1 digit at a time? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. If you are new here, welcome. This is Duke of Hearts Romance. We tell stories about people the world underestimated. Subscribe. The next one is already being written. Good night. I'll see you in the next one.